Hello, welcome all. So everyone has heard or seen the movie Titanic, right? Good film. Maybe a dramatized version of the true events. But not historically inaccurate, right? Well, yes. While the Titanic of 1997 is a good film, that isn't the Titanic we'll be talking about today, however. Today we'll talk about the one from 1943. Did you know there was a German World War II Titanic movie? As I've said before, today's video will be about the inaccuracies of the propaganda film Titanic from 1943, made by the German regime. I will say the German regime for the remainder of this video and not the other name, as you'll know what I'm talking about when I say that. The film was commissioned by Goebbels, who was the propaganda administrator and one of the Reich's most important leaders. It was also banned in several countries after the war. The film had a heavy involvement with the German regime, with its naval officers largely overseeing the project, and sailors from the actual German Navy being on the film set. The film would end up costing 4 million Reichsmarks, making it one of the most expensive films of the 20th century. Because the film was shot in the northern Baltic Sea on the SS Capricorn, which was destroyed by Allied planes toward the end of the war, tragically it was also carrying 5,000 POWs and members of German concentration camps. During the production of the film, the war was obviously still going on at this time, and the crew had to worry about Allied bombing raids, which happened dangerously close to production. Another problem was arguments between the German army director and when German officers started flirting and trying to get with the female cast members of the project. The original director, Herbert Seplin, had a bone to pick with said regime upon going on a tirade about the German military and even the regime itself. He supposedly committed unalive and was found hanging by his suspenders. Though it was rumored by the German film community that Goebbels had ordered the man killed by the Gestapo, which would make sense, as while I'm not a forensic specialist, I would make the assumption it is rather difficult to commit unalive via your suspenders. After that, a new director was put on the film, and it was rushed into production. However, at this time the regime wanted to give the German public more uplifting films, and were worried that this particular film would be too grim and dark for their current predicament, so it wasn't even released to the German public. The movie opens up with the company who created the Titanic, the White Star Line, having its shareholders scrambling and its stock plummeting. The Englishmen who run the White Star Line, especially the president, later called Bruce Ismay, is painted as greedy, evil, and cowardly throughout the film. Ismay tells his shareholders that the stock is plummeting and that there is nothing he can do. He then held a secret meeting with the board of the White Star Line, stating that they should hope the stock keeps dropping, and the people who give their pennies to such an organization should be ignored, and they aren't going to do anything about them. Shortly later in the film, the board of the White Star Line is sort of inspecting passengers on board of the vessel. German scientists are introduced, stating that they don't have much to their name, and the Germans count in marks. And the Englishmen sort of turn their nose up at this remark, showing the Englishmen that think of themselves better than the Germans on board, as depicted in the film. Shortly later in the film, the White Star Line board members jump up in order to buy the shares the moment the president, Bruce Ismay, talks about the grand nature of the voyage of the Titanic, and the men exclaim that he's a genius, and they have to buy all the shares before it can hit the papers. Not long after, John Astor, who was another English villain within the film, tells his assistant, Mr. Hopkins, of his own plan and scheme to get the price down, and then he'll buy all the shares and own the Titanic. Both of these scenes within the film show that the English characters in the film are meant to be seen by the German people as being evil and greedy, with the only English characters in the film conducting schemes to get more cash. Later on, Ismay is shown that his scheme of trying to get back his shares has blown up in his face, and his scheme isn't working out for him, and the stock is still plummeting. He hopes to get to New York at record speed, and hopes that it will show his ship is fast enough and win the blue ribbon. Later on, Peterson is shown to be the only German crew member on board the ship. An English officer then makes fun of his accent, then smartly asking how they got a German on board the crew, showing an Englishman's prejudice towards a German of the crew. Quite ironic, given the whole film and its propaganda against the English. Shortly after, Peterson informs the captain that he took it upon himself to reduce the ship's speed and change its course, due to reports of ice drift and icebergs. Ismay is also in the room and asks why. He shows his frustration. Ismay acts condescendingly and stubborn, whereas Peterson educates Ismay on icebergs and acts very smart about it. Not condescendingly, just more so showing his perhaps humble intelligence. When Ismay orders the captain to maintain the ship's course and speed, the captain mentions he will undertake that request. Peterson is shown to know more than the captain. Ismay replies with a smarmy attitude and stating he is the only German crew member. He doesn't care about the blue ribbon. Peterson replies that Ismay is endangering the lives of everyone on board, showing the English as greedy to the point of endangering thousands of people's lives to obtain a profit, as well as the German intelligence and moral superiority. After an exchange about how an English crew member says that they are on the fastest ship in the world, and that Peterson should be grateful that he is on such a vessel, to which Peterson replies that he'll be out of the ship soon enough, and he'll be out of this lack of responsibility, showing the German character's stoicism. Peterson remaining calm and Ismay growing impatient. Basically the same conversation as earlier. Peterson now trying to get Ismay to slow the ship, knowing that Ismay has more power than the captain. Then Ismay tries to fire Peterson, and Peterson says that there is nothing Ismay can do as he is a passenger. Once again showing the Germans' moral superiority as well as stoicism. Shortly later, the vessel is sinking after hitting the iceberg, and the captain tells the crew not to let the passengers know the ship is sinking. The captain tells Peterson that he should see to the most important passengers first, perhaps showing his prejudice towards the few German passengers. Ismay is told the Titanic is sinking shortly later, and that women and children are to go first, and that he should ready his life vest. Ismay begs and pleads for his life, as he knows now his life is forfeit, once again showing the German character's stoicism and bravery, as well as the cowardice of the English. Shortly later in the film, Peterson explains to the captain that they have sent off all the flares. However, there are only the white flares now, and the red flares are the only flares that should be used as SOS flares, showing the German character's intelligence, even over the captain of the vessel, an Englishman. As the news was broken to John Astor and Bruce Ismay by Peterson that they are accepting only women and children into the lifeboats once again, as men are trying to get into the lifeboats, they are shot. As this conversation happens, Astor and Ismay both look very afraid for their lives, showing once again the German character's stoicism and bravery in the English cowardice. Towards the end of the film, Peterson saves a little girl. Well, we can't really say this is a bad thing. I'd like to say, given the people behind the film, this scene could be seen as Germans using the little girl as cannon fodder in their propaganda film, which ironically enough, they did towards the end of the war, employing child soldiers. The credits then roll with the words reading, "The deaths of 1,500 people remain unatoned, the eternal culmination for England's quest for profit." The message of the film, portrayed by the Germans, is that the English are cowardly, greedy, and evil, whereas the Germans of the film are depicted as strong, smart, stoic, and morally superior. This can be seen, moreover, in the characters depicted within the film. The English character of Ismay, in particular, being overly greedy and so blinded by his own greed that he is portrayed as dooming thousands of lives on board the ship to a watery grave, all for his greed, which he cared more about than anyone on board the vessel. In this next clip, his greed is portrayed. Or do you think all the little people who invested their pennies will just sit on their shares? You should be happy if they sell. Then the price will drop even more, and they give us even more chance to buy it on the cheap. I agree. We're the board of the White Star Line, not some charity. But what do we do now? It's simple. We sell too, and bring the price even lower. 236 to 313. Ismay and the board. In this scene, his greed is shown. In the next clip, it's also shown. The game is over. Yes, the game is over. You've played long enough. During the quote, he literally admits the game is over. This is a double meaning, with the first meaning being that the ship is sinking, which is meant to be seen as ironic, as he has also shown his schemes are over. In the next quote, his greed has blinded him, and he's shown as endangering the lives of the people on board. I've changed and reduced our speed. Why? You'll certainly recognize an iceberg in plenty of time. Pardon me, but you're mistaken. Some icebergs are miles long, and some of them underwater. 2851. Ismay Peterson. This scene shows that Peterson is depicted as intelligent and stoic. Meanwhile, Ismay is once again shown to be very greedy, but also his drive for profit over lives. Well, Peterson doesn't say much, but he rescues a little girl, and afterwards climbs aboard a lifeboat, depicting him as morally superior and brave. In contrast with the scene previously depicting Ismay as cowardly and selfish, caring only for his own survival. Moreover, the German character of Peterson is depicted in the film as how the evil German regime and Hobler would have wanted the German people to be, with that being strong, smart, and stoic, which is portrayed throughout the film. Overall, the German regime stood up for the inevitable iceberg crash, and that the Englishmen, and largely Ismay, are responsible for the deaths of all the people on board, with many of the protagonists being German. This could also be seen as a parallel to the themes of the propaganda pushed by the German regime, that the Germans in World War I were screwed over by the Allies. It is shown here, too, that in this movie the Germans are screwed over by English malevolence. The Germans wanted to flip the Lusitania on the Americans, with the Americans being aboard the Lusitania having their lives lost by German U-boats. Here it is flipped, with the Allies being responsible for the lives of the Germans on board the Titanic. With its destination being New York, the Americans are taken as a backseat within the film, as much of the focus being on the English, though it could be seen as the Allies overall. Finally, as the credits roll, the deaths of 1,500 people remain unatoned for the eternal condemnation by England's quest for profit, proving the overarching theme of the propaganda film being that the English are evil and blinded by greed. The film focuses much on the English villains being evil and greedy. Without the time, Hobler not having any other option than to use the Luftwaffe to bomb Great Britain, with Operation Sea Lion being largely an unalive mission, and Churchill and Britain's refusal to cave to German demands, and the RAF being able to withstand the Blitz within Great Britain, and the British being able to rout the Germans, and proceed to bomb the head of the snake, so to speak, and bomb Berlin, which incredibly angered Hobler. At this point, during the war, 1941 to 1943, the British are the main country which Hobler can't defeat, keeping him fighting, with the British keeping the German war machine fixated upon them. All the while, Hobler wanted to mount an invasion of the Soviet Union, and he couldn't. He wanted to commence Operation Barbarossa, and at this time, during the film production, Germany wanted to gain more support, as he was now fighting a war on two fronts, essentially three, when the United States would join the war in 1941. And then later, at the Battle of Stalingrad, the Soviets were able to rout the Germans. Hobler wanted the German people to have the same disdain for the British and the Allies as he did, trying to get to them to want to destroy the Allies, want them to destroy Britain and support the German regime. However, after the film was later banned in Germany, with its original director being unalived, and the film was later rushed, with it being rushed and released in Paris in 1943, much of it was never even shown to the German people, as by the point of 1943, the German war machine was no longer focused on trying to get its people to support its efforts within Great Britain. It was now more focused upon extermination of Jewish people, and more occupied with trying to buy time on the Eastern Front, no longer focused as much on blitzing Britain. So that begs the question, if the film was banned in Germany and never even shown to the German public, then why am I even talking about it? Ultimately, this film has the undertones of what was wrong with the evil German regime, with it being its ultranationalism to the point of racism, which can be seen against the British within the film, as well as the Allies in general, with the destination being New York, and Hobler seeing the Americans as the other evil in league with the British. The undertones of the racism towards the British are quite clear, not only with the greed and the sliminess of the English characters that are depicted within the film, but also their cowardice, showing he thought the English to be a greedy and evil people, while the Germans in the film are depicted as stoic, smart, and strong. With the final credits rolling showing Hobler and Goebbels and the German regime full disdain for the English people. Also with the final credits showing Hobler and the regime blamed much of the sinking of the Titanic upon the Allies' incompetence and cowardice and greed, showing he wanted to show this to the German people. It was ironic that the film portrayed the Englishmen as prejudiced towards the Germans of the film. All the while, it was the evil German regime who started World War II and dragged all of Europe into a war which devastated the world and killed 80 million people. It proceeded to exterminate an entire group of people across the continent during the war as a project they hoped to complete, calling it the final solution, comparing the Jewish people to animals and justifying a genocide against them. The ugly racist truth of the evil German regime was exposed to the entire world, however, during the Nuremberg trials, where the men behind the war and all the devastation it caused were called to answer for their crimes. And unfortunately, most of them couldn't even be held responsible for their abhorrent crimes. They committed. The top leaders of the regime, Hobler, Goebbels, Göring, and Heinrich, had all either escaped or unalived themselves, with others being seen as good assets for the next big war, were taken to the US of A in Operation Paperclip. Because of the fact that most of these inhuman monsters had never stood a trial, has allowed people for the modern day to try to justify their actions. Overall, the film shows the Allies as being incompetent, greedy, slimy, and cowardly, and evil, while the Germans in the film are depicted as smart, stoic, strong, and morally superior, with the real history of World War II being that the German regime was the most horrible regime in the entirety of human history. That concludes the Titanic 1943 propaganda film. Thank you for watching.